Hello, class, and welcome to our presentation, Christianity and Capitalism, where we will analyze sociologist Max Weber's Protestant work ethic thesis. So we're going to revisit our question of Christianity and capitalism from the previous presentation, and then we're going to talk about the phenomenon, the Protestant work ethic, the spirit of capitalism as argued by Max Weber, and then we will end with a few concluding comments and questions. So as you may recall from our previous presentation, we ended with the following question. What is the relationship between Christianity and capitalism? That is, does Christianity support capitalism, or is Christianity ultimately critical of capitalism? Well, in the Protestant work ethic and the spirit of capitalism, German sociologist Max Weber argued that Protestantism, especially Calvinism, contributed to the rise of capitalism. Thus, Protestant Christianity is not only compatible with capitalism, but also contributed to its rise. Interesting. So how so? That is, how does Max Weber make this argument that Christianity and capitalism are not only compatible, but that Protestant Christianity actually led to the rise of modern capitalism? Well, let's take a look at his thesis. So he analyzes this from a historical perspective. So Weber argues that before the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century, the salvific needs of Europeans were satisfied by the practices of the medieval Roman Catholic Church. That is, in the medieval period, people wanted to be saved. They wanted to experience eternal life in heaven. And the Roman Catholic Church was able to give this to them through practices like confession and absolution, through the Eucharist, through the intercessory prayers of monks and nuns, as well as through practices such as pilgrimage. But in the 16th century, with the rise of figures like Martin Luther and John Calvin, those practices in certain parts of Europe fell apart. Thus, after the Reformation, Protestant Christians in Germanic provinces like Germany, Switzerland, and Northern Europe no longer benefited from the practices of the medieval church, so they had to innovate new practices that would lead to salvation. And these medieval practices were replaced by, according to Weber, more worldly practices encouraged by the Protestant reformers like Luther and Calvin. And these worldly practices for Weber led to the development of two things: the Protestant work ethic, or the principle of Christian hard work, and the spirit of capitalism, or Christian enthusiasm for profit and investment. So let's talk about the Protestant work ethic. So for Weber, the doctrine of vocation was one of the elements that led to the creation of this Protestant work ethic in Europe and later in America. So what is the doctrine of vocation? It is Martin Luther's theology that all Christians are called upon by God to be priests, meaning they are to do the work of God in the secular world through a variety of occupations. So for Weber, the doctrine of vocation, which was stressed by both Luther and Calvin, encouraged Protestant Christians to work hard in their professions as a means of glorifying God. So if you are a doctor and you're a Protestant, according to Weber, if you follow this doctrine of vocation, then you try to be the best doctor you can be as a way of glorifying God. And therefore you have a spiritual practice in the secular world that will lead to salvation. And the Protestant work ethic was further encouraged by Protestant teachings on predestination. So both Luther and Calvin advocated a theology of predestination, or the idea that God as an all-knowing being already knows who will be saved and who will be damned. In other words, according to the doctrine of predestination, there is nothing you can do to be saved. The chess pieces on the board of salvation have already been set by God, and thus Weber argues that Protestant Christians were constantly concerned about their salvation, anxious over whether they are among the elect or among the damned. Now, how does one know whether or not they are part of the elect? Well, in his Institutes, John Calvin argued that there were certain outward signs that a person was among the saved. And one such outward sign was economic prosperity and worldly success. So how did the doctrine of predestination contribute to the Protestant work ethic? Well, predestination motivated people to work hard and prosper economically so that they could psychologically convince themselves that they were part of the elect. So yes, maybe if I work hard enough and I'm economically prosperous, that'll be a sign that I am among the saved. So in conclusion, according to Max Weber, the doctrine of vocation, as well as anxiety over predestination, motivated people to work hard, which resulted in the Protestant work ethic. So we know what the Protestant work ethic is, so what is the spirit of capitalism? Well, this refers to enthusiasm for investment, which resulted from the Protestant attitudes of asceticism or denial of worldly pleasures, and delayed gratification or delaying pleasure until a later time. That is, Protestant Christians were discouraged from accumulating earthly wealth, so the only thing to do was invest back into the economy. Now, wait a minute. What about the Christian teachings on charity? So, in other words, if you make all this surplus money, if you make profit, why not just give it to the poor? Well, for Weber, because of the doctrine of predestination and outward signs, the poor were considered to be among the non-elect. Hence, the poor were considered sinners and thus not worthy of charity. So if you can't give to the poor and you can't gratify yourself, then you might as well invest your money back into your business. So in conclusion, for Max Weber, Protestantism contributed to the rise of capitalism because it, one, created a hard-working and motivated generation of laborers and entrepreneurs. Two, it encouraged entrepreneurs to invest their surplus money back into the economic system. And three, it inspired Christians to be rugged individualists in charge of their own salvation through their professions. So again, not only is Protestant Christianity, according to Weber, completely compatible with the principles of capitalism, the Protestant Reformation actually led to modern capitalism's rise. So I will be curious as to what people think about this thesis as we engage in our discussion during the week.